My recollection of the past could be more precise. Still, as far as I can remember, I believe I was only 4 years old when my mother divorced my biological father and subsequently remarried, ultimately securing my custody. There was something about my stepdad's family that I never liked, and while growing up, I started to avoid them more and more. Although I do not wish to insinuate that my stepfather or his entire family was deplorable, a few individuals within that group made me feel highly uncomfortable, prompting me to distance myself from them as much as possible. I was 11 years old when my step-uncle, whom we'll call Jeff, suddenly started coming to our house more frequently to watch NFL games with my stepdad. They would sit on the couch, drink beer, and cheer for their favorite teams. However, something about Jeff's behavior made me uneasy as time passed. One evening, when my stepdad was passed out on the couch after too much drink, I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water when Jeff stood near the staircase. His eyes lingered on my body in a way that made my skin crawl, and his smile was unsettling. As he started walking towards me, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was so scared that I ran back to my room and locked the door behind me, hoping he wouldn't follow. After that, I would see him more than usual, dropping at our house unannounced and flirting with my mom while eyeing me. She didn't pay much attention and would laugh at his weird remark about her body. Eventually, his comments shifted to me as he would say stuff like my beauty takes after her, and while my mom thought he was complimenting her, it was only unpleasant to my ears. I started to lock myself in my room upon his displeasing presence, hoping he would stop coming. A month later, when I returned from school one day, I was greeted by the sight of him sitting on the living room couch, engrossed in yet another NFL game. As my eyes darted around the house, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized no one else was present. The intensity of his presence made me feel extremely anxious and scared. Trying to avoid his gaze, I hurriedly tried to walk to my room, only to be startled when he asked if I wanted to watch football with him. I don't watch TV. I dashed to my room after saying that, but I could feel his gaze pierced on my back before I disappeared into my room and locked it after me. I received a phone call from my mother, notifying me that they wouldn't be coming home tonight and that my Uncle Jeff would be watching over me. Despite my attempts to persuade her that I would be fine alone, she scolded me before hanging up the phone. Sitting in my room, I sighed deeply, wondering how long I could go without food or water. At approximately 10 o'clock, I could no longer endure hunger and thirst. Consequently, I ventured out of my room in search of a quick snack, and as I looked around, he was nowhere in sight, leading me to believe that he had retired to the guest room for the night. As I began to take out some food from the refrigerator, I was unexpectedly startled by the sensation of someone firmly grasping my waist. I jumped at the sudden unwanted touch, only to find Jeff standing there with a nasty grin. By the looks of it, he seemed pretty drunk, and as I tried to get out of the kitchen, he grabbed my hand and pulled me closer, making my body tremble with fear. His grip only got tighter as he touched me inappropriately. While I struggled to escape, I started to cry and begged him to let me go, but the evil smile on his face only grew more prominent. When he didn't let me go, I bit him with my entire strength, summoning to my teeth, which made him angrier, and as he let me go, a slap followed to my cheek, making me fall to a distance. But before he could do anything else, I sprinted to my room and locked it after me. I then started bawling as I dialed Mom's number. She answered after the 5th ring, and as I started telling her everything with my sniffles, what she said in reply filled me with hatred for her. My cries grew louder as I called my biological dad, who instantly picked up my call and began worrying as he heard me bawling. I told him everything, and he disconnected the call after saying he would be here soon to pick me up. About half an hour later, I heard the sounds of someone getting beaten through my room, and prayed it not to be my dad getting beaten up. A few minutes later, when he called me, I immediately unlocked the door and rushed to his arms while crying my eyes out. I saw Jeff groaning on the floor from the corner of my eyes as I followed my father outside. I told him I wanted to live with him, and he promised to challenge my custody in court. The next day, 2 officers arrived at my dad's house instead of my mom, informing us that she had filed a report that he kidnapped me after assaulting Jeff. The officers asked me to come with them, but I refused and told them everything that had transpired the night before as I showed them the bruises on my cheek. I also told them what Mom said when I called her crying for help. What's done is done. I'm sure it must be because of something you did, so stay inside your room till we get back tomorrow. My father filed a counter case against them upon my testimony, making my mom's claims false since she was not at the scene. While my mom did say she said what she did to me for my safety since there were no means for them to return immediately, her claims were still denied, and my dad ended up winning my custody. A restriction order for Jeff was issued along with the trials of his crime, and as the investigation began on him, it turned out it was not just me who became a victim of him. He was eventually sent to jail and sentenced to 12 years in prison for all his convictions. I despise football games now since they remind me of those unpleasant memories, and my dad makes sure never to watch them in front of me. My mom still tries to meet me, but I cannot let go of my hate for her, and I have no idea when I can forgive her, for the words she said that night continue to linger in my mind whenever I think of her.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Cheater. I still remember the day I married Carla. It was around 12 years ago. She was this sweet, delicate, and petite girl who captured my heart from the very first moment I laid my eyes on her. At that time, she was dating a guy, but I couldn't help but fall in love with her. I started to make advances toward her, hoping that she would notice me and be attracted to me. To my surprise, she responded to my advances, and I thought maybe I had won her over, and she had fallen in love with me too. Despite being in a relationship, she started meeting me secretly, and we started hanging out more and more. Soon after, she broke up with her boyfriend and got together with me. Looking back, I should have known that it was the first red flag in our relationship, but my love for her so blinded me that I never noticed. After dating Carla for a couple of months, I decided to propose to her, and she happily accepted. Carla had a penchant for spending money, but it never bothered me since I had a good income. To keep her happy, I began working even harder than before. I was completely devoted to her and never once considered the possibility of her being unfaithful to me. I poured my heart and soul into the relationship, believing that Carla felt the same way. However, I was unaware that I should have been more cautious of her actions. Little did I know that my trust in her would soon be shattered. For the past 6 months, I've observed my wife's shopping behavior. She seemed to have shifted from her usual in-store shopping to ordering items online for home delivery. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to what she ordered or how much she spent. However, I started noticing that the house was filling up with unnecessary items that she had ordered online. I began to feel that she had become one of those people who could not resist buying things online. I tried to discuss my concerns with her, but she always came up with excuses. Another thing I noticed was that a delivery guy would frequently visit our home. I found this odd and sometimes caught him leaving our house when I returned home. The frequency of this man's visits increased over time, and I began to suspect that something was not right. I shared my concerns with my best friend, who suggested I install hidden cameras around the house to monitor the situation. That day, as I sat inside and watched my wife through the hidden camera, I noticed her opening the door for the same delivery guy. He handed her a package, and as she turned to put it on the table, he grabbed her by the waist and pulled her closer. I felt enraged to see this, but my heart shattered into a million pieces when I saw her passionately kissing him and leading him to our bedroom. I immediately stood up and practically ran to the parking before taking out my car and rushing home, while constantly hoping that she would send him away. My heart throbbed at the thought of my wife with another man doing the stuff she was supposed to only do with me. I accelerated my car to get to my home as quickly as possible to stop what was happening inside. However, the more I recalled the two of them kissing, the angrier I became. I didn't want to imagine what else they might have been doing in my bedroom, and the mere thought felt like 1,000 stabbing knives to my heart. Upon arrival, I ran up the stairs to my apartment instead of taking the elevator to arrive faster. The moment I stepped into my house, a sense of unease tugged at the corners of my mind. I moved quickly and quietly, and my footsteps were muffled by the plush carpeting beneath my feet. My heart was pounding in my chest as I approached my bedroom door, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. When I pushed the door open, the scene that unfolded before me was like a knife to my heart. My wife was there, entwined with the delivery guy, their bodies pressed together in an intimate embrace. The sight was like a physical blow, and I felt as though the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move or speak as the tears streamed down my face. With a sense of defeat and losing my mind, I grabbed the man, started beating the shit out of him. I didn't care what it was that I grabbed. I hit him with whatever I could find. Carla screamed for me to stop and tried to calm me down, but it only made me enraged as I slapped her so hard she let out an ear-piercing scream while falling on the floor. I don't know how long I kept beating the guy, but I was pulled back to my senses by the sound of the doorbell and the voice of the police asking to open the door. Turning toward trembling Carla, I whispered in her ears that she would keep her mouth shut or I would kill her before we went to open the door. I knew the police were suspicious of me and that I would be the one going to jail while she would get away with what she did to me. So I texted my best friend Adam, asking for help and to give her instructions on what he needed to do once I was in prison. Just as I predicted, I was locked up, and a few days later, I was charged with murder after the delivery guy died in the hospital. When the police asked me if I knew anything regarding Carla's disappearance, I denied it, while knowing all too well that Adam had probably done his work.
Two nights ago, I was awoken by my dog between 11 and 3 a.m. at most. He kept near me when I finally got up and made a low, aggressive growl facing out of my room, but kept close to me. He's never done this before. I've worked with canines for years. They gave me a gut feeling, and then I heard it. Someone talking. In my dad's yard, no more than 20 feet by the sound. Low mumbling or bad whispering. I was blaring Return of the King, yes, the extended version. I need to add that I have childlike hearing for my age for context. If you speak in one floor home with two doors closed at a whisper, I can make out the words. He went quiet when I opened a drawer too loud to grab my .38 Special, chambered around and noticed a shadow passing by a light outside the blurred window. Home was clear, all doors locked. Nothing odd, but my dog peeled out. I held my flashlight in one hand, went his way and called him to the other side. He was gone. I guess they knew I was home and ran on foot. I went around but thought, okay, I'm good. Well, Florida continues to be Florida. Night 3. My dog does this again in the same frame, waking me up, and at this rate, I just got the 12 gauge. My dog was acting far more protective and gave me the dog body language for major threat, need the pack, can't handle alone. I froze for a moment. 2 people now? This is not good. They must intend to violently take whatever they could be after. it was one new guy and guy one from yesterday. I can't risk getting a look. At this rate, they mean business and had to be armed to scope out a place with a Ring camera, 60 pounds of muscle dog, and my grown self with a lifetime of handling weaponry. In the yard around 2:30 a.m. for a second night, they knew I and my dog were home but clearly had a goal. This time, voices were behind the home. My dog then pulled a freaking Leroy Jenkins. He gave one of the most aggressive, loud barks I'd ever heard of any dog do and ran to the wall. I ran to his side, getting him hyped up, yelling, "Mess them up, they're dead men." Now things are clicking for me. This was planned and professional. I checked every inch of the property with the shotgun. My dog was worked up and spooked, but calming to be with. I'm buying a mistake for this one, and a good one. I went inside. I literally kept that gun on me and chambered and in reach of my bed, and I barely slept. Day 4. I did a bit of looking around for misplaced or slightly moved objects or scratched up locks. Yep. One trash can by the gate was rotated 180 degrees, with the handle facing me and not the wall as it always been placed. A few crushed dead twigs as I went back. The head chair was turned to move to the right. A clearly odd thing is that table is set symmetrically, so it's glaringly obviously out of place if you live there. The Ring camera system and my neighbors so far show nothing, but I knew these guys had to have known that my dad was gone. They knew his son lives there, that the dog would eat them and is huge, that I had a gun, and I even announced that it was armed. Yet they came back with backup. Then the dude came back up, moved stuff I didn't know till my maritime buddy told me to check if such and such a rock was out of place. It's a way to gauge the person's awareness and presence, I guess. Whatever their goal was, I don't care. I just want them to know if they come back again, I'll be strapped to the gills.
I'm a 25-year-old male. This happened to me back in 2012. I was pretty oblivious to a lot of things at that age, and always tended to give people the benefit of the doubt, which I do much less nowadays. So I was having trouble finding direction after graduation from college, jumping from job to job, and getting more and more discontent with how my life was going when I came across a post on a popular social media site that was advertising that they were looking for young people to do seasonal work in the U.S. I had nothing to lose, I thought, and the money to be made sounded promising. It would be an opportunity also to have an adventure. So I contacted them and got the process going, but was still unsure of taking that step. My current boss was self-centered. One morning, soon after we'd had a particularly bad falling out, which resulted in me calling him a lot of 4-letter expletives, and walking off the job, literally tearing my uniform shirt off and throwing it on the floor. That was the sign I needed to jump at the opportunity to go on the trip I'd planned. I got the job offer from a farmer in rural central northern Idaho within the week. And about 3 weeks later, I was on a plane to Salt Lake City. Then I was on a 7-hour-plus bus trip to the farm. After a few hiccups, a delayed flight, and a bit of stress, I finally got there. The 8 months went by flawlessly, and I had an amazing time. I had a great employer, was making lots of friends, and was able to see so many awesome sights. However, this event started to unfold about 2 weeks before I was due to return to my home country in late November. Temperatures were below freezing already on most days, and snow was sticking to the ground. I arrived home on a Friday evening at about midnight after watching movies at a friend's place. I was a pretty serious night owl at that age and could function on 3 to 4 hours of sleep for months on end without problems. I called my parents around that time too, because of the time difference, so it was around midday back home. I talked for about an hour or so with them until we hung up. When I did, I had a vehicle drive up our shared driveway. So the layout of our apartment block was as follows: 2 blocks of 4 units each, 2 on the ground floor, and 2 on the first floor. So 8 in total. We had a shared driveway with all units facing it. and one parking space for each unit next to each other right in front of the bottom unit. I lived in number 4, which was the right-hand side top unit in the first block. And the crate this story is about lives in the 6th, which was the bottom right-hand unit in the second block, and his name is Corey. The way my unit was laid out, I would have a full view of the whole driveway and all car parking spaces into the street. Unfortunately, there was very little light in the parking areas as the street lights didn't reach down the driveway. But now back to my story. I peeked out of my front window and saw it was the guy from number 6 coming home, as I recognized his truck and him, as well as his stocky build beard and shaved head. I could hear he was mad and probably drunk because he was bellowing some nonsense and shouting something towards his girlfriend who was getting out of the passenger side. He started kicking and punching some of the vehicles in the parking area, knocking the window out of an F-150 and breaking down the railing from the stairs leading to the second floor units. He went on like this for about 15 minutes with his vandalism and violent outbursts before his girlfriend herded him inside and it became quiet. Nothing else happened that night, so I got into bed as I had to work the next morning. When I got home about 5 p.m. that Saturday evening, there was a police cruiser in the driveway. I went up to my unit, and a while later there was a knock on my door. I opened it up, and it was the officers. They asked if I'd seen anything the previous night with regards to the property damage outside. Now, my normal consensus would be to stay out of anything that doesn't affect me personally. But I didn't want to lie to the police in a foreign country and risk getting in trouble myself. So I gave a vague and short description of what I'd witnessed, making sure not to directly point to the guy in number 6. I just said it was a guy with a shaved head. Then they thanked me and went on their way. The following Tuesday morning, I got a loud knocking on my door again. As I peeked out of the front window, I saw the guy from number 6, Quarry, pacing on my porch and shouting to open up as he knew I was inside. I became cold, immediately thinking, uh-oh, now I'm going to get beaten up. Then about 5 minutes later, my employer pulled up and the guy stormed off. I got to work feeling terrified the whole day. I considered contacting the police officer that took my statement, but decided against it as I didn't want to cause any more trouble. I got home pretty late that evening. A little while later, I saw Corey's girlfriend walk over and knock on my door. I opened up and she asked if she could have a chat. I said sure and stepped outside, where she explained that he was on probation, so any incidents would cause him to go back to jail. I said to her that he shouldn't have acted out and vandalized people's property then. After a bit of back and forth between us, I gave her a copy of the statement I had, showing that I hadn't implied him directly, only giving a general description, saying it was dark and I couldn't see much, and that put her a bit at ease. I told her I would retract the statement and said I was sleepy and unsure of what I saw, so he would stay away from me. She said she would talk to him. A couple of hours later, I get another knock on my door, and it was the girlfriend again. Corey stood at the bottom of the stairs. She said he wanted to apologize. I went outside and saw my neighbor on his porch. I felt pretty apprehensive now, as this was the first time I'd laid eyes on the guy. He was big, about 6 feet and 250 pounds. He was a bodybuilder type with swastika tattoos on the visible parts of his arm. I shook his hand and we had a lighthearted conversation on my porch, with him apologizing. He offered me his cell number and took mine, saying if I ever wanted to hang out, I should text him. I thanked him and they walked off. I decided to never contact him, as I don't like associating with extremists. Fast forward to Friday, when I only work half a day. As I got back to my apartment, Corey and his girlfriend drove in. We greeted each other, and they invited me to go out with them for dinner. I declined, but they insisted, so I eventually gave in and agreed. They said we could all drive together, so I met up at 3, but it was only him. He said his girlfriend didn't feel well, so I got in his truck and we drove down to the local Mexican restaurant. Initially, we had a good conversation, but then it started to die down. We finished eating, paid, and walked out. I wanted to walk the 3/4 mile home, but he insisted I get in a truck with him as we were both going the same way. I felt uneasy about it, but I got in and we drove out of the parking lot. But he turned the opposite way of going home. I asked him where were we going, and he said he wanted to show me something. I asked what it was, and he said it was always where they went snowboarding when they were in school. All this was said in a monotone voice without making eye contact, which made me feel more uneasy, even teetering towards being scared. Now, I'm not a small guy at 6'2" and about 220 pounds, but I physically have no chance against Corey. We drove out of town and toward the mountains when he drove off the asphalt road and onto a gravel one that led up into the mountains. I became more freaked out. After about a 30 to 40 minute drive, he stopped in the middle of the road. It was starting to get dark out now, and I hadn't had cell service for the past 20 minutes. He got out and took out a hunting rifle from behind the seat and then said something for the first time since we left dinner, except for answering my questions about where we were going. In that same monotone voice, without making eye contact, he said, "Now we go hunting." I was terrified at that point and said I would wait for him in a truck. But he looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. They were dark dial, I did, and I could see the hate deep within them. He barked, "Get out!" So I did, so slowly, with my phone in my hand, looking for nearby trees that I could run to, anything I could use for cover, as I was sure that I was the one who was going to be hunted. As I started walking around the truck, though, my phone rang. He ripped me out of my daze. I was at that moment wondering how the hell I had cell phone reception up there. I looked at the screen, and it was one of my friends calling. I answered. Her voice was the most beautiful sound I ever heard. I immediately told her where I was and with who, and she asked me if everything was okay. I told her that if she doesn't hear from me again in the next 30 minutes, then she should call the police. The call began to break up, so I repeated what I said to her again, and to tell the police what I just told her. The call finally cut out, and I looked at Corey. His eyes were shooting daggers at me. He was red in the face, and he looked like he was about to burst an artery in his head. I told him to take me home, turn around, and get back in his truck. So he put the rifle away, got in, and drove like a madman back. For the whole ride, he didn't say a word or make any eye contact. When we arrived at the apartment complex where we lived, he stopped in the street, but didn't turn into the driveway. I jumped out before the truck even came to a complete stop and saw my friend's car parked in my spot since I didn't have a car at the time. She came running towards me as soon as she saw me. We went into my apartment where I explained what had happened. She went wide, and when I told her who the guy was, she told me to pack my bags and to come stay with her and her family. So I did just that. When we got to her house, her dad asked if I was okay. She'd filled them in after the phone call. I explained it all again, and her dad asked me who the guy was. I said his name and gave a description. Her dad got a somber look on his face then and explained that I had been very lucky. He said we should contact the police immediately and give a statement. Also, because he was on probation or parole, unsure of which one, that it was illegal for him to possess a firearm. I called the officer that took my initial statement, then who later came by the house. He was friends with my friend's dad, and I gave another statement. I flew back to my home country a week later. I'd stayed with my friend and her family for that week, as work was just about done and they were having Thanksgiving, etc. Then, the Sunday after the event, her dad and I were making a roast in a barbecue grill in the garage when he filled me in a bit more about Corey. He'd been to school with him, and since then Corey had been a bad seed, dealing drugs, getting into fights, and just being a generally unproductive waste of a human being and a burden to society. His first stint in jail was just after age 18 when he got caught with more than a pound of weed in his possession. He got 3 years for it, as it was his first offense. But the second stint was shortly after he got out. A nature conservation officer caught him hunting illegally. When he confronted him, Corey flipped and beat the officer half to death. That got him 10 years, but his stay was extended. For how long, I'm not sure, because he shanked a couple of inmates and jumped in and assaulted a prison guard. He also told me that the police picked up Corey on Friday night and found him with the loaded rifle in his truck. He was promptly arrested as it was a violation of his probation. Our interaction took place a few months after he'd gotten out the second time, and her father said there were rumors of him shooting a rival dealer in a city close by, but nothing could be proven. He was also a proud member of the white supremacist. I saw his girlfriend the night before I flew back at the grocery Subway. The look she gave me was one of pure hate and anger. I still wonder if she was in on the plan or knew what he was planning to do. I lost contact with my friend and haven't been back there since, and I don't plan to either. I've had enough of redneck neo-Nazis. So Corey, maybe you just wanted to take me on a hunting trip and I overreacted. But with your history of violence, I highly doubt it. If you had premeditated plans to take me out in the forest and hunt me like prey, for that, I hope you rot in prison. Society is a better place without you roaming around freely.